Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. What would you do if you came home and an HOA gate was installed across your driveway, locking you out of your own house, unless you paid their fees? I thought it was a mistake, until the HOA president answered the phone and said something that made my stomach drop. So I did one thing that forced the truth into the open. My property is what real estate people call a flag lot. If you're not familiar with the term, picture a flag on a pole. The pole part is my long private driveway that stretches back about 300 feet from the main road, and the flag part is where my actual house sits on 2 beautiful acres. When I bought the place, it was surrounded by undeveloped land, mostly just trees and overgrown fields. The previous owner had lived there for 30 years and loved the privacy. So did I. The house itself was built in the 1970s, solid construction with big windows that let in tons of natural light. It needed some updating when I moved in, but nothing major. I spent the first year painting, refinishing the hardwood floors, and turning the backyard into a little oasis with a garden and a fire pit. My driveway was gravel, lined with old oak trees, and I loved driving home after work, leaving the noise of the main road behind. Then, about 3 years ago, everything changed. A development company bought all the land around me. Within 6 months, they'd cleared the trees and started building. Cookie sea-cutter houses went up faster than I could believe. Every single one looked almost identical, with the same beige siding, same black shutters, same tiny yards. They marketed it as a luxury community, which was hilarious because the houses were crammed together so tightly you could probably hear your neighbor sneeze. But here's the thing. My property was grandfathered in. I owned my land outright, and my driveway was part of my legal property with a clear deed and survey from when I bought the place. The new development went up around me, but I wasn't part of it. The developer knew this. We even had a brief conversation when they first started construction, and they assured me my property wouldn't be affected. The new community got its own entrance off the main road, and that entrance ran almost parallel to my driveway. In fact, the geography of the whole situation was a bit unusual. My driveway connected to the main road about 50 feet south of their entrance, but here's the crucial detail that becomes important later. The very edge of their entrance actually overlapped with an easement that I owned. When the original survey was done decades ago, that strip of land where the easement sat was designated as part of my property's access rights. I didn't think much of it at the time because nobody was bothering me. The houses sold fast. Apparently, people loved the idea of a planned community with rules about what color you could paint your mailbox and how tall your grass could be. An HOA was formed immediately, and at first I barely noticed. They had their community, I had my house set back on my private driveway, and we coexisted just fine. Then she showed up. I'm going to call her the HOA president because that's what she was. She got elected about 8 months ago, and from what I gathered from the few neighbors I talked to at the gas station, she'd run on a platform of increasing property values and maintaining standards. What that actually meant was she wanted to control every single aspect of everyone's lives. My first interaction with her was almost funny. I came home from work one Tuesday afternoon and found a notice stuck to my front door. It was printed on official-looking paper with the HOA logo at the top, and it informed me that I was in violation of community standards for having the wrong shade of mulch in my flower beds. The fine was $50, payable within 10 days. I actually laughed out loud. Then I called the number on the notice. She picked up on the second ring, and her voice was already dripping with authority. She told me she was the president and that she'd personally done a drive-through of the community to check for violations. I explained as politely as I could that I wasn't part of her HOA. My house was here long before the development. I wasn't subject to any of their rules. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then she told me that didn't matter, that the entire area was now under HOA jurisdiction, and that I needed to comply like everyone else. I told her to have a nice day and hung up. I figured that would be the end of it. I crumpled up the notice and tossed it in the recycling bin. But that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few months, I'd occasionally see her driving slowly past the entrance to my driveway, craning her neck to look down toward my house. I'd get random notices left on my door about my grass being too long or my trash cans being visible from the street, which was absurd because my trash cans were 300 feet back on my own property. I ignored all of them. I could tell she was furious that there was this one property she couldn't control, right in the middle of her perfect little kingdom. But legally, there was nothing she could do. I'd even talked to a real estate lawyer friend of mine at a barbecue just to make sure I was right about my status. He confirmed it. I wasn't in the HOA period. My property was separate, and unless I voluntarily signed something, I never would be. I thought the whole thing was just an annoyance, like a mosquito buzzing around. Irritating, but ultimately harmless. Then came the morning that changed everything. I work as a shift supervisor at a manufacturing plant about 20 miles away. My schedule rotates, and sometimes I pull 12-hour night shifts. They're brutal. You start at 7 p.m. and don't finish until 7 a.m., and by the end of it, you're so tired you can barely remember the drive home. That particular week, I'd been on nights for 4 days straight, and I was counting down the hours until my weekend started. Thursday night into Friday morning was my last shift of the rotation. Everything went smoothly at work, no major problems, and I clocked out right at 7 a.m. feeling like a zombie. All I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and sleep for about 10 hours. I pulled off the main road onto my driveway, my brain already on autopilot. That's when I saw it. Where the entrance to my driveway met the main road, there was now a gate. Not a simple little wooden gate or a chain across the road. This was a serious, heavy-duty automated gate arm, the kind you'd see at a parking garage or a secure facility. It was painted bright white, and it stretched all the way across the entrance to my driveway, completely blocking my access. I sat there in my truck staring at it, my exhausted brain trying to process what I was seeing. There was a metal pillar on the right side of the driveway with a control box and a keypad. The gate arm extended from that pillar all the way across to a receiver post on the other side. I put my truck in park and got out. The morning was already getting warm, and I could feel sweat starting to form on my back. I walked up to the keypad, hoping maybe there was some kind of instruction or a code written down, but there was nothing. Just a blank numeric keypad with a little green light indicating it was active. I looked around, half expecting to see construction workers or some kind of explanation, but the area was empty. The HOA's entrance was about 50 feet to my left, and I could see a few of their residents leaving for work, their cars smoothly passing through their own entrance with no gate in sight. My driveway was blocked. My house was on the other side of this gate, and I couldn't get to it. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures of the gate, the pillar, the keypad, everything. Then I looked up the HOA president's number, which I still had saved from that first ridiculous mulch violation. She answered after 4 rings. I could hear the smugness in her voice before she even said hello. She told me she'd been expecting my call. I asked her what the gate was doing across my driveway. She sounded absolutely delighted to explain. The HOA had voted to make the community a gated community for security purposes. They'd installed the new gate system the previous afternoon while I'd been at work. She called it a security upgrade that would benefit everyone. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level despite my exhaustion and growing anger. I told her she'd blocked my access to my own property and I needed the code to open the gate immediately. That's when she dropped the bomb. She explained in the most condescending tone imaginable that the gate system was for HOA members only. If I wanted access, I would need to join the HOA. There was a one-time gate assessment fee of $500 to cover my share of the installation costs, plus I'd need to start paying the monthly dues like everyone else. The dues were $175 a month. I asked her if she was seriously trying to extort me into joining an HOA I wasn't part of by blocking access to my own house. She didn't like that word. She told me it wasn't extortion, it was community policy. Then she added that if I wasn't willing to be a team player, I could park on the public street like everyone else who didn't live there. She suggested I should think of it as motivation to finally join the community properly. My hands were shaking, and I realized I was too tired and too angry to have this conversation productively. I told her I wanted everything she'd just said in writing. She actually laughed. She said she'd be happy to send me the information. She asked if I had a preference for how I received it. I said anything written would be fine, and she told me she'd get something to me. We hung up, and I stood there in the rising heat looking at my blocked driveway. I was parked on the shoulder of the main road, and I knew I couldn't leave my truck there all day. I ended up parking on a side street about a quarter-mile away and then walking back to my driveway. The gate only blocked the entrance so I could walk around it. Then I had to walk the entire 300 feet up my gravel driveway to my house. By the time I got inside, I was drenched in sweat, furious, and more exhausted than I'd ever been. But I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with what had just happened. Around 10 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from her. It was everything I needed. She'd actually typed out the exact extortion attempt, detailing how I could gain access to my own property by paying the $500 fee and joining the HOA. She included the monthly dues amount and added that failure to comply would result in my vehicle being towed if I parked near the gate. I saved that message in 3 different places. Then I finally managed to get a few hours of sleep. When I woke up that afternoon, I was thinking clearly. I wasn't going to yell or argue or do anything stupid. I was going to handle this the right way, which meant gathering information and understanding exactly what my legal standing was. First, I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out all my property documents. The deed, the original survey from when I bought the house, the title insurance, everything. I spread it all out on my dining room table and started reading through the legal descriptions. My property was clearly defined. The flag lot configuration was spelled out in detail, including my driveway easement and access rights. There was absolutely no ambiguity. My driveway was mine, and I had legal right-of-way to the main road. Then I looked more carefully at the survey map. The boundaries were marked precisely, and I noticed something interesting. The strip of land where that gate pillar now sat was very close to my property line, possibly on it. I needed a professional opinion. I spent the next hour calling surveyors, explaining my situation and asking if anyone could come out quickly. Most places said they were booked out for weeks, but I finally found a small firm that said they could squeeze me in the next morning if I was willing to pay a rush fee. I agreed immediately. That night I walked back down to the gate with a tape measure and a flashlight. I wanted to get an approximate idea of where things sat before the surveyor came out. The concrete pillar housing all the gate electronics was substantial. Probably 18 inches square and 4 feet tall, with the gate arm mechanism mounted on top. I measured from landmarks I knew were on my property, and it looked like that pillar was definitely on my side of the line. The next morning, Saturday, the surveyor showed up right on time. He was an older guy with weathered hands and the kind of careful, methodical approach you want in someone doing precision work. I showed him my original survey and explained the situation with the gate. He got to work setting up his equipment. It took him about 3 hours to do a complete boundary survey of the front section of my property. I stayed outside with him, answering questions and watching him work. When he finished, he called me over to look at his findings. The news was even better than I'd hoped. Not only was the gate blocking my legal right-of-way, but that concrete pillar was a full 3 feet inside my property line. It wasn't even close. The HOA had installed a permanent structure on my land without permission, without an easement, without any legal right whatsoever. The surveyor printed out a preliminary drawing right there from his laptop setup in his truck. He said he'd have the official certified survey ready by Monday, but this preliminary version clearly showed the encroachment. I asked him if he was absolutely certain about the measurements. He showed me his GPS coordinates, his tie-ins to the original survey markers, and walked me through his methodology. There was no doubt that gate was on my property. I paid him for the rush job, and he said he'd email me the final documents within 48 hours. I spent the rest of that Saturday thinking about my next move. By Sunday morning, I'd made my decision. I was going to give the HOA one chance to fix this voluntarily. I sat down and carefully wrote out a message to the HOA president. I explained that I'd had a professional survey done, that the gate was on my private property, and that it was blocking my legal access. I stated clearly that she had 48 hours to remove the gate and restore my driveway, or I would handle the situation myself and pursue all costs and damages. I sent it and waited. Her response came back within an hour. It was just a laughing emoji, followed by a short message telling me to stop bluffing and pay the $500 if I wanted access. She added that if I continued to make threats, she'd have my vehicle towed and pursue legal action against me for harassment. I read her response 3 times. She really didn't believe I'd do anything. She thought she'd cornered me, that I'd eventually give in and join the HOA rather than deal with the inconvenience. That was her mistake. I'd spent all of Saturday afternoon and Sunday morning doing research. I'd called my lawyer friend again, talked to him about my options. He'd given me some excellent advice about how to handle this legally. First thing Monday morning, I called the county code enforcement office. I explained the situation about an unpermitted gate blocking emergency access. They told me I should also contact the fire marshal's office, which I did immediately after. The fire marshal I spoke with was very interested in my story. He asked detailed questions about the gate, whether there was any kind of emergency override system, and whether the local fire department had been notified. I told him I hadn't seen any Knox box or emergency access system, and that, as far as I knew, nobody had coordinated with emergency services. He said he'd send an inspector out that afternoon to take a look. He also mentioned that blocking emergency access without proper permits and emergency override systems was a serious violation. While I was making these calls, I was also reaching out to contractors. I needed someone who could remove the gate quickly and professionally if it came to that. I found a company that did demolition and site work, explained my situation, and asked them to come out for an estimate. The owner of the company came by himself that afternoon. He looked at the gate, asked to see my survey and property documents, and nodded. He said the job would be straightforward. The concrete pillar was bolted down but not extensively anchored. He could bring a crew with a backhoe and have the whole thing removed in about 4 hours. He quoted me $2,800 for the complete removal and disposal. I told him to be ready to go, but that I'd let him know for sure within 24 hours. The fire marshal's inspector showed up around 3 p.m. He took one look at the gate and started shaking his head. He walked the area, checked for emergency access systems, and took a bunch of photos and notes. Before he left, he told me unofficially that this was one of the more blatant violations he'd seen. No permits, no emergency access, blocking a right-of-way. He said the HOA would be getting a visit from his office very soon. Tuesday morning, my 48-hour deadline passed. I hadn't heard a word from the HOA president. Around 10 a.m., I called the demolition contractor and told him I was ready to proceed. He said he could have a crew there by 2 p.m. that afternoon. I took a personal day from work. This was something I needed to see in person. The crew showed up right on schedule with a small backhoe on a trailer, a truck, and some hand tools. The owner walked through exactly what they were going to do. First, they'd disconnect any electrical lines running to the gate. Then they'd use the backhoe to pull the concrete pillar out of the ground. The gate arm itself would be unbolted and removed. Everything would be loaded onto their truck and hauled away. I set up a folding chair off to the side, made myself a cup of coffee in a travel mug, and watched them work. It was incredibly satisfying. The backhoe made short work of the concrete pillar, ripping it out of the ground with chunks of asphalt and dirt still clinging to the bottom. 2 workers unbolted the gate arm and dismantled the control box. Within 3 hours, the entire gate system was gone. My driveway was completely clear for the first time in 5 days. The crew even graded out the area where the pillar had been and filled it with gravel so the entrance looked relatively normal. The owner told me they'd take the gate materials back to their yard and that I legally owned all the salvage material since it had been abandoned on my property. He suggested I might be able to sell the motor and control system to an automation company. I paid him with a credit card, got a detailed receipt for everything, and thanked him for the fast work. After they left, I stood at the entrance to my driveway, looking at the clear path to my house, and felt a huge sense of relief. That relief lasted about 45 minutes. I was inside when I heard a car screech to a halt outside. Through my window, I could see a luxury SUV parked at an angle near where the gate had been. The HOA president got out and just stood there, staring at the empty space. Then she started screaming. Even from 300 feet away inside my house, I could hear her. She was on her phone, her arm gesturing wildly. About 20 minutes later, a police car pulled up, then another one. I took a deep breath, gathered all my documents, put them in a folder, and walked down my driveway to meet them. The HOA president saw me coming and immediately started yelling, telling the officers that I'd destroyed HOA property, that I'd committed theft and vandalism, that I'd stolen a $15,000 gate system. She was demanding they arrest me immediately. The 2 officers looked tired, like this wasn't their first HOA dispute. One of them asked me for my side of the story. I stayed calm. I explained that I owned the property, that the gate had been installed on my land without permission, and that I'd given the HOA 48 hours notice to remove it before taking action myself. Then I handed the officer my folder. He opened it and started going through the contents. My property deed, the survey showing the encroachment, the messages between me and the HOA president, photos I'd taken, the receipt from the demolition contractor. The officer took his time reading everything. His partner was standing with the HOA president, who was still ranting about property damage and theft. After about 10 minutes, the first officer called his partner over and showed him the documents. They had a quiet conversation, then both of them turned to the HOA president. The first officer explained that this was a civil property dispute, not a criminal matter. He told her that according to the survey, the gate had been installed on my property without permission. He suggested she contact a lawyer if she wanted to pursue the matter further. She absolutely lost it. She started screaming that they were refusing to do their jobs, that there had clearly been a crime committed, that I couldn't just steal a gate. The second officer cut her off. He told her very directly that if she continued to trespass on my property or harass me, she could be arrested. He handed my folder back to me and suggested that the HOA president leave the area. She stood there, her face bright red, shaking with rage. Then she got in her SUV and peeled out, tires squealing on the pavement. The officers asked if I wanted to file a harassment report. I said not yet, but that I'd keep the option open. They gave me a case number for the incident and left. I thought that might be the end of the immediate drama, but Wednesday morning brought a new development. A car from the fire marshal's office pulled up to the HOA's main entrance. An official got out and spent about 30 minutes looking at their community entrance, taking measurements and reviewing documents. I found out later, through one of the friendlier HOA residents I'd gotten to know, that the fire marshal had issued a citation and a fine to the HOA for the unpermitted gate installation. The fine was $5,000 and they were required to submit proper plans and permits before installing any kind of gate or access control system in the future. The citation specifically mentioned blocking emergency access and failing to coordinate with the fire department. Over the next few days, I started hearing more about the fallout. The HOA community was in an uproar. The gate project had cost $15,000 and now it was completely gone. The residents were being told there would be a special assessment to cover the loss, plus the fine from the fire marshal. Each household would be charged about $400 to cover the total costs. People were furious. They'd been told the gate would enhance security and property values, and instead it had cost them extra money and brought them negative attention from the authorities. I also took the demolition contractor's advice and called a few companies that dealt with automated gate systems. One of them was interested in buying the motor assembly and control electronics for parts. I sold everything I'd salvaged for $1,200. Between that and the costs I'd paid for the survey and demolition, I actually came out slightly ahead financially. But the best part came about 2 weeks after the gate removal. I heard from my friendly HOA neighbor that there was an emergency board meeting scheduled. The entire community was up in arms about the special assessment and wanted answers about how the gate disaster had happened. My neighbor texted me updates during the meeting. The HOA president tried to explain that she'd been acting in the community's best interests, that I was the problem for not cooperating. But other board members started asking uncomfortable questions. Why hadn't she verified the property boundaries before installation? Why hadn't she gotten permits? Why hadn't she backed down when I provided survey evidence? Then residents started speaking up. One person pointed out that the HOA president had been warned by multiple people that my property was separate from the development. Another mentioned that several residents had questioned whether the gate installation was legal and had been told not to worry about it. The meeting apparently devolved into chaos. The HOA president started yelling at residents, telling them they didn't understand how hard her job was, that she was trying to improve their community. That made things worse. A motion was made to remove her from the presidency. It passed unanimously, with only her voting against it. She reportedly left the meeting in tears, still insisting she'd done nothing wrong. The new HOA board president, who my neighbor said was a much more reasonable person, sent me a formal apology on behalf of the HOA. It acknowledged that the gate installation had been done without proper research or legal authority, and assured me that the HOA would not attempt any similar actions in the future. I appreciated the gesture, even if it was mostly covering themselves legally. Life has been quiet since then. I pull into my driveway every day without any obstructions. The HOA has stayed completely away from my property. I haven't received a single violation notice or heard from anyone in their organization. My lawyer friend told me I probably could have sued for additional damages, emotional distress, the inconvenience, all of that. But honestly, I felt like justice had been served. The people responsible faced consequences, I got my property rights protected, and I even made a little money on the deal. Sometimes I see the old HOA president driving around the neighborhood. She never makes eye contact. I heard she tried to run for the board again a few months later, but lost badly. Most residents apparently haven't forgotten the special assessment they had to pay because of her decisions. I've learned a few things from this whole experience. First, always keep your property documents organized and accessible. That survey and deed were worth their weight in gold when I needed to prove my case. Second, document everything. Those messages where she basically admitted to extortion were crucial. Third, know when to get professionals involved. The surveyor, the demolition contractor, even the fire marshal, they all played important roles in resolving this. But maybe the most important lesson was about standing your ground when you're in the right. The HOA president was counting on me being intimidated or worn down. She thought she could bully me into submission by blocking my access and making my life difficult. Instead, she learned that illegally blocking someone's driveway tends to make them very motivated to solve the problem. I still love my house on my flag lot. The long driveway lined with oak trees feels even more valuable now that I fought to protect it. And every time I drive home and turn onto my completely unobstructed driveway, I think about how good fences make good neighbors, but illegal gates make for a great lesson in property rights. The whole situation could have been avoided if the HOA president had done 5 minutes of research before ordering that gate installation. She could have checked the property boundaries, confirmed where her community's actual property ended, maybe even had a conversation with me first. Instead, she let her desire for control override common sense and basic legal due diligence. I'm still not part of the HOA, and I never will be. My property is mine, my driveway is mine, and nobody's putting up any gates across it without my permission. That's exactly how it should be. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This story starts way before 2023, but the crux of the situation started in 2023. For context, I am not from the US, but instead a Caribbean country. Most of y'all already guessed it. So I believe it was 2015 when someone who my family knew moved in next door to us. At that time, it was a just single mom with 2 kids. Now, because of the economy of where I lived, even back then, times were hard for everyone, my family included, so they would always ask for assistance, such as salt, sugar, etc., etc. Even times they would come over to stay of the day or whatnot. Never really an issue for me at that time. The issue was when the single mom, well technically she just didn't live with her man, had another kid with her man, now it was 3 mouths for her to feed. When that happened, again, they came over a lot more constantly, which never minded since they wasn't over all the time and would go home in the evenings, but it was rising. Fast forward after the pandemic hits and it was 2021, they were over a lot. And they would still ask for commodities and I would always be the one to get it for them. So if they wanted salt, an onion, a tomato, etc., I would always be the one to help them. Heck, most times they don't even go to my egg donor and instead just come straight to me if they wanted something. But the main issue that I was having was that they were eating a lot of our already diminishing food. And I was saying to my egg donor, would never call that piece of trash mom, that we can't keep doing it for the long run because we already don't have much. She told me to just shut up because we are helping them. For additional context, I was the only doing 80 to 90% of the cooking. This sentiment was also shared with all of my older sisters. They are also garbage as well. Now you might be wondering, what does that have to do with malicious compliance? Just continue reading and you will see. Fast forward to 2023, the year it happened. My egg donor and her oldest cult member, her oldest daughter, was talking in a room in that house. I don't remember why, but I was outside. The lady sent over her youngest daughter to ask for something. So because I was outside, I'm like, okay, Emma, just see what she wants and get it from her. So I said, hey, what do you want? She replied she was going to ask my egg donor for it. I'm like, I can just get it for you. She was like, no. So I was like, just tell me what you want and Emma go get it for you. Then I heard her mom calling for her and I was thinking I was going to get it for her. Few days later, my egg donor called me and asked why I shouted at the lady youngest daughter. I was like, I didn't. I only asked her what she wanted. Then she and I got into a back and forth where she was essentially saying I was wrong and I should have allowed her to come directly to her, and me saying I usually just assist them without you or anyone else being disturbed. Then she said these words, it doesn't matter. When them come over and ask for anything, just don't help them and make them come to me, cue malicious compliance. Mind you, at this point I already detested my egg donor and her daughters, so I was happy to oblige her and her command. What they didn't realize was the many times I had to help them when they asked for things and cooked for my neighbor's daughter as well. Yes, I was that dumb, roast me for it, IDC. The next time they came over to ask for something and they came to me, I just directed them to my egg donor or her daughters. Now realize this, I was doing this since I was 17 until I was 23, and apart from my small suggestions, I never complained about it once. They could not even manage a few months without them complaining. They were like, every time them want something, them come over here and ask. If they want something to eat, we have to cook it for them, etc., etc. And I was just basking in it. I even remember one specific situation where one of my neighbor's daughter came inside my house and asked me for something. I said to her to go outside and ask my egg donor. She came back in and said my egg donor said I should do it. I looked this young girl in her face and said, tell her that I said, if she wants you if I get the thing, she should come in and give it to you herself. Man, my egg donor was mad about that, LMAO, and their anger about the situation just grew and grew, mostly because my egg donor would be sleeping and they came over to ask for something and I would direct the kids and say to them, wake them up and ask them for what you want. Needless to say, they were very upset that they even asked me to go back to help out, and I said no. Now, for additional context, remember when I said I would bring up concerns like we already have diminishing food and giving them? They said I was evil for not helping them out and talking about our diminishing food and how often they were visiting and sleeping over, etc., etc. Well, fast forward 2024. This situation sealed the deal. After years of build-up of their foolishness and abuse, and I had a big fallout with them. My egg donor and her daughters was complaining about how the kids was always coming over, always needing something, how they always giving them and having to cook for them and everything. All concerns that I raised up in the past, and now they saw why I had concerns about them. And when I said they were complaining so bad I was like to myself, do y'all really love those kids as much as you claim? But then my moment came. In the height of them complaining, I just burst out laughing and said, not to them directly, but was talking loud enough for them to hear, I remember when I said the same thing and I was evil. Man, look how the times have changed. LMAO never saw them that mad about me being right. They only said to themselves, who was talking to him about anything? And the funny thing, I never heard them complaining about it ever again. Guess my egg donor shouldn't have given me that command. Anyway, thank you for watching.